We are in Mishneh Torah, Rabbeinu Rambam, Zichrono Livracha. I believe it is Perek Shishi Halacha Yod Aleph, or Yod, depending on your edition. And you should be able to see the text now before you. Omer Rabbeinu Rambam, Talmidei Hachamim אינם יוצאים לעשות בעצמם עם כל הקהל בבניין וחפירה של המדינה וכיוצא בהם, כדי שלא יתבזו בפני עמי הארץ. We are discussing here what might be described as public works. In other words, if the city, the town in question, is building a wall, it has been decided to build a wall around the city for reasons of defense, and that everybody takes part in this effort, in the actual building. So this halacha states, Talmidei Hachamim enam yotzeim la'asot ba'asmam im kol hakahal bevinyan v'hafira. Talmidei Hachamim are not to be sent out to work with the rest of the people in kol hakahal, in the building and the digging. Hafira is digging. Shel medina v'chayotze behen. The word Medina, of course, means a city, a walled city. And the reason for this is not to pamper them, but so it's really, if everyone was on a much higher level, if all members of the public had the correct and proper understanding and attitude towards Talmidei Chachamim, this halacha would not actually be necessary. But seeing that there will be people who they will see Hacham Torah, they will see him stripped to the waist and digging a trench or something, or the foundations of the wall. They will see such a thing, and this will cause them to disparage him or to make light of him, or to be less in their eyes. And for that reason, Talmidei Chachamim are peturim. They are not to be instructed to go out and do what others are doing. However, we see elsewhere in Hilchot Shechenim that they are not patur from the financial burden. Rambam discusses this in Hilchot Shechenim, Perek Shishi. Rambam discusses over here, and I will share it with you now. Hilchot Shechenim, Perek Shishi, Halacha Hey or Wow. Kol ha'devarim she'atzrichim l'shmirat ha'ir. All that is required for the defense and upkeep of the city. Lokahim mikol anshe ha'ir. All citizens, all residents are required to pay that amount which has been decided upon that each household must pay. Even from orphans. In other words, you have orphans, and usually would have an apotropos, which is a Greek word which means a guardian who's in charge of their affairs. Even from their estate, they are required to pay for this. Chos mitamidei Hachamim, says Rambam. Lefi she'en tamidei Hachamim tzarichim shemira haTorah shomartan. It's an interesting discussion whether this halacha appears in the Talmud Bavli, but this halacha is not so obvious from Talmud Yerushalmi, and it requires serious discussion. But whether this was agreed by all or not, but in the Talmud Bavli, we see that this was the consensus. When it comes to the general upkeep of the city, preparing the roads and the footpaths and sidewalks, etc., etc., afilu min hachamim. Now, if some of these works are being done by the people themselves, this is what we discuss now in Hilchot Torah. Again, we see the emphasis and the rationale for this halacha has to do with Amei Haaretz. There are many things in life, in halacha, that would not be done in a certain way, would not be necessary, where everybody, where the attitudes and opinions of most people, including the common people, were they to be as they should be. But because this is not the case, the excuse me, the ma'amad, the status, the standing, the image of Talmidei Chachamim who represent the Torah has to be taken into account. Okay, we return to Hilchot Talmud Torah. ואין גובים מהם לבניין החומות ותיקון השערים ושכר השומרים וכיוצא בהם ולא לתשורת המלך. Talmidei Chachamim are patur from various levies and taxes. לבניין החומות, the building of the walls, תיקון השערים ושכר השומרים וכיוצא בהם ולא לתשורת המלך, and not that which has to be given. Let's say that the king comes to town, and it doesn't matter which kind of who the king is. It could be a Jewish king, a righteous king, and it could be a Gentile king and someone very far from righteous. But the town is required to put him up and to host him, etc., and not just himself, but probably his entire entourage, and that's a large expense. So all such expenses, such levies and taxes, Talmidei Chachamim are patur from. They are not required to give the what we probably should describe as the poll tax. In other words, there was a general tax per household, per head, that either the town was required to give to the authorities, or this was a special tax on the Jewish community, which was very common, Ben mas shehu kasuv al banei ha'ir, ben mas shehu kasuv al kol ish wa ish, whether it's this kind or that kind of tax, poll tax, or it goes by however the town's local government divides the burden. Never they are patur from these things. Shneimar gam ki yithnu v'goyim ata akablasem wa yahelu ma'at mimasa malach v'sarim. In that pasuk in Hosea, there is a remez, something about wa yahelu ma'at mimasa malach v'sarim. They will be relieved of the burdens and obligations towards the king and the government. The sarim is technically means ministers or officials. I recall, I think it's relevant to mention this. I recall as a child in Australia that we're talking about the Vietnam War. During the Vietnam War, there is a pact, a treaty called the ANZUS Pact, for those who wish to know or those who may have forgotten. ANZUS is an abbreviation for Australia, New Zealand, US. This was a treaty, mutual defense treaty, signed between those three countries after the Second World War. And this requires that one comes to the aid of the other in certain circumstances. And this meant in practice that Australia sent, there was a draft in Australia. There was a military draft at that time, and soldiers were sent to Vietnam. But I recall that those studying in university were exempt from this draft. I think something similar existed in the United States at the time. I believe if you studied in university and college, you were not required to serve in Vietnam. I'm not sure about the details, but I believe that's the case. I know this was the case in Australia and probably in New Zealand, but I wasn't there at that time. The reason I mention this is simply to point out that societies do and should have a set of values and aims for the general betterment of that society. And therefore they bestow preferential treatment on certain sectors of the population in order to achieve a certain goal. In the case of university studies, the idea, I suppose, was that people studying university are doing something of value, not just to themselves, but to the general society, and the country needs these people, and places a premium on such people compared to other people. Perhaps that does not sound egalitarian, but that is the reality. How much more so, kal v'homer, that this should be the case in the Jewish nation, the Torah nation, that the nation of the Torah, the nation that received the Torah, is defined precisely by that Torah, as Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon writes, "She'en umathenu umah ela b'toratheha." Our nation is only, the Jewish nation is only defined and is only deserving of that appellation because of its connection to and its devotion to the Torah and its living according to the Torah. And this requires that Talmidei Hachamim be ever present within the Jewish world, within Jewish society, And it also requires, as in this case, preferential treatment. How to apply this in which situations with regards to what type of tax or levy or obligation or duty, that is a much more complex question. I won't go into that right now. But the principle here is something that we should note. That the Torah is the overarching principle of Am Yisrael, and it has always been, and must always remain so.
Rabbi?
Yes.
In a case where you're living under a government and the monetary laws of that government don't align with halakha,
Yes.
to some extent, the rule dina de malchuta dina is applied. Does that standard apply in the same way to what's happening in Israel right now? Would the government of Am Yisrael, even if it's not following the Torah, be classified in the same way?
Let me see if I understand your question. Are you asking whether the concept of dina de malchuta dina applies in Eretz Yisrael?
Essentially, yes.
That is a huge mahloket, a huge mahloket. There's more than one opinion on the matter, but there certainly are some sources. Let's just say this for now. There are certain sources, and there are definitely a number of Rishonim who state explicitly that dina de malchuta dina does not apply in Eretz Yisrael to any government in Eretz Yisrael. If it's a government of goyim, well, they're just conquerors and oppressors and occupiers, etc. It doesn't matter whether they are called Bavlim or Ashurim before them, or Persians once upon a time, 2,500 years ago, or Greeks, Romans, or the Yishmaelim from the hordes from the desert who overran the country and brought the desert with them, as the historian, I think his name was Vilnai, I can't remember his first name, said that the Yishmaelim not just come from the desert, they brought the desert with them. Wherever they went, they spread and created desert. And in other words, things fell into disuse and disrepair and collapse, civilizational collapse, etc., etc. And then, of course, we had all manner of tzaddikim ruling over Eretz Yisrael. Beyond that point, also, then you had the Mamlukim, and you had you have the Crusaders, and you have then eventually we ended up with the Ottomans and with the British, whoever it was. They certainly cannot claim to have any legitimacy. By what right do you rule in this land? You are here as illegal conquerors. So it doesn't require much imagination to understand why we would say their laws do not apply here. They're lesetim or lesetis. They are just like highway robbers at best. Even that is a generous description. Now, with regards to Jews, obviously they are required to act in accordance with the Torah, and if they do not do so, they are clearly Rishaim. Whether they are aware of this fact or unaware doesn't change the fact that that is their obligation. That is what they are required to do, and if they're not doing so, the ideal would be to replace them with someone else who would act in accordance with the law, with the Torah. And that is the savara, that is the rationale of those Rishonim who claim that in Eretz Yisrael there is no such thing, that the whole concept of dinod de malchut dinar applies only in Chutz La'aretz, because there they rule by right. We cannot claim that they have no legitimacy, that they have no claim to authority or control over that piece of land, and we are living in their land in actual fact. That is true. And we have to play by their rules. But that's the svara of those who say that this does not apply in Eretz Yisrael. There are those who say it does, and it's a very involved, very, very involved sugya. All right, so Rambam continues, and he says, Halacha Yod Beth. Should be able to see it on the screen. V'chen, im hayatha sahara letamid hachamim. If you have a hacham or even a tamid hachamim, what we would call today ben Torah, manihim otho limkor tehila. He has sahara. He is a merchant. He makes a living by buying and selling various goods and merchandise. Now, if let's say there's a shipment of let's take something that was very, very highly valued. Let's say in the medieval period, things like black pepper, which was used for a number of purposes. One of them was preservation of food, which was, of course, a very big deal in those days before refrigeration, etc. So many merchants probably now received a shipment that came in from the source of these spices originally was mainly India. Many received a shipment, and one of them is a Talmid Chachamim. He is to be, it is correct that there should be a bylaw, shall we say, in the city that states that the Talmidei Chachamim who sell such merchandise be given a head start so that they can quickly make a turnover, they can sell their merchandise and make some profit, and spend less time in business activities, so they'll have more time for the Torah activities. And that is why manihim odhol imkor tahila. He is allowed to sell before others. So others may be prevented from selling that product until he is able to do so. So yes, he's given a certain mercantile advantage. Again, we see that the underlying principle here is very clear. Talmidei Chachamim, again, doesn't mean just the most famous and brand name rabbis of the generation. It means all Talmidei Chachamim, all those who spend a lot of time, devote much time and energy to the study of Torah, what we would call today B'nei Torah. It doesn't have to be a person who's necessarily enrolled technically, officially in a yeshiva or as an avrech somewhere. That might be the case, and it might not be the case. But if this is what he does, this is how he runs his life, then he is his value, his worth in the Jewish Torah scheme of things is greater than another person who does not lead that lifestyle. And yes, and therefore he should be given some special consideration in certain matters. And this is what this halacha discusses. Now, if he was involved in some legal dispute with another person, let's say he claims that someone owes him money or vice versa, he's not has v'shalom given preferential treatment by the Beit Din in the sense that the mishpat, the din, will be tilted in his favor against the halacha. No, if he's hayav, he will be told, you're hayav to pay this person the money that they claim you owe them. But if he will not be, he will be propelled to the top of the list, and so that he can be in and out of there as quickly as possible. Again, because his time is more valuable, because he makes better use of that time and uses his time and his energies for activities, for those things without which Am Yisrael will not be Am Yisrael. And therefore, this is a perfectly reasonable and even it's absolutely necessary. It's imperative that such people be given such treatment, and therefore makdimim otho or moshivim otho. And he's also allowed he's as we said, propelled to the top of the list. In other words, the Beit Din will try and deal with his case more promptly and in a more immediate fashion. And moshivim otho, even though usually the Baalei Adin are required to stand, he will be allowed to sit as a sign of kavod la Torah. But his mishpat, his din, will be the same as anyone else's. And sometimes there are those who come before a Talmid Chachamim in such matters. For example, in Hilchot Sanhedrin, Perek Kaf Aleph, Rambam says here, "Hayu lifnei adayanim ba'alei din harbe." The Beit Din has many people waiting to have their case heard. Rambam says, "Makdimim din hayothom ledin ha'almana." A case involving an orphan comes before is to be given precedence and dealt with more quickly than that of an almana, because the pasuk says, "Shenemar shifto yothom rivu almana." So we know these people are generally lacking power and status in society, and the Torah comes to their aid and does take these things into account. Again, not in terms of changing the psak din, in terms of who is hayav and who is patur, who has to pay and who does not have to pay. But we're talking here about hakdama. We're talking about the order and the timetable of the Beit Din. Within ha'almana kodem ladin tamid chachamim, and a din which involves an almana who has a claim before the Beit Din comes before that of a tamid chachamim. Within tamid chachamim kodem ladin am haaretz, as we just saw now. Within ha'isha kodem ladin ha'ish sheboshet ha'isha meruba. And in general, women are also given preferential treatment in a Beit Din before men. In other words, their case will be heard more rapidly, and with they will cut corners to have her case heard and get her out of the Beit Din, because it is not it's not kavod gadol. It's not. In fact, it's the opposite. It's yesh boshet. It is not. A woman should not feel that she wants to stand there in the Beit Din with all these people and men, etc., called kubuda bath melech panima, and therefore this is not a place for her to be unnecessarily. That which is necessary is done, and that which is not necessary, which can be avoided or which can be expedited, is to be expedited. Okay, Rambam back in Hilchot Talmud Torah Perek Shishi, Halacha Yod Gimel or Yod Aleph. Rambam says. Arwan gadol hu levazoth et hachamim, or lisno otha. It is a great sin to disparage, to treat Talmidei Chachamim with a lack of respect, or to make fun of, to ridicule, or even worse, lisno otha, or to hate them. And we know that such things exist for various reasons. Sometimes it's simply a matter of jealousy. And Chazal say, Lo harava Yerushalayim ad shebizu ba Talmidei Chachamim. שנאמר, והיו מלעיבים במלאכי האלוהים, ובוזים דברו, ומתעתעים בנביאו. Klamar, Rambam says, this pasuk in Divrei Yamim, describing the situation of society at that time, at the end of Beit Rishon, speaks here about treating with disrespect and ridiculing and disparaging. It talks here about Malachei HaElohim. Malachei HaElohim refers to Nevi'im, as we see the Hemshech, the continuation of the Pasuk. The word Malach, of course, essentially means the messenger. So Nevi'im are messengers of Hashem. Uvozim devaro, and they would make light of that which the Nevi'im speak to them in the name of Hashem. Umita'ta'im binvi'o. They make light of and ridicule and point fun at these people and their message. Rambam says, Kulomar bozim melamedei devaro. In general, they have a total lack of respect for, and in fact, quite the opposite. They attack either verbally or physically, and show complete disregard for anything that these people have to say. That is, this type of behavior is an arwan gadol. The words arwan gadol should jump out at us. Such a term is not used frequently with regards to many things, and this is one of these types of avera, of sin, of behavior that warrants this terminology. וכן זה שאמירת תורה אם בחוקותיי תמאסו, חז"ל דורש מלמדי חוקותיי תמאסו. If you show your behavior, your attitude, your words, display and demonstrate a revulsion for melamdei hukothai, those who teach my laws, in other words, the teachers of Torah, then as the parasha over there continues, then your punishment will be very great. V'chol ha'mevazeh et hachamim, he who makes light of the Hachamim, en lo halek l'olam haba, v'rehu bichlal ki devar Adonai baza. On another occasion, we will look at the Mishneh in Masechet Sanhedrin that talks about Kol Yisrael yesh lahem halek l'olam haba, and then it goes on to discuss those who do not. And then at that time, we'll discuss why such a case as this perhaps is not mentioned there. But when Chazal use this terminology, en lo halek l'olam haba, they are telling you that this is an extremely serious matter. And therefore, Rambam continues. Afal pi shehamevazeh hachamim eno halek l'olam haba. So therefore, this person will certainly be punished. B'dinei shamayim, by Hashem, im ba'u idim shebizahu, if there are witnesses who testify that he called Atimil Chachamim called him names or embarrassed him in public deliberately, or let's say he shouted at him and cursed him. Im ba'u idim shebizahu, afilu bidvarim, even only by way of speech, verbally, not anything beyond that. Hayav nidui, such a person is to be excommunicated. Umenadim otho beth din barabim, and this is done publicly, and he therefore will be disrespected. V'konasim otho litra zahav b'chol makom, and he is given, he is fined to pay an amount which is 1 litra of gold. And this fine is handed over to the Chacham in question. As for the amount of gold in question, that is also a mahloka, that is interesting discussion. There are certain measurements that, according to the Rambam, it's nearly 150 grams, 148 grams of gold. But this figure is not agreed to by all. Rashi's estimation of a litra is different, and for good reason. And there's very, very powerful reasons to say that Rashi's definition is more correct. But and this has to do with the fact that the Romans simply ruled in areas not far from Rashi, as Rashi mentions in his Perush on the Talmud. He's familiar with certain weights and measurements from Roman days still that were still being used in his day, and he mentions in Cologne in Germany today. This was not necessarily the case. These measurements were not necessarily in use in Rambam's day, in where Rambam found himself. In other words, mainly we're speaking about Egypt. At any rate, it's a significant amount of gold. It's a significant fine. And he who disparages or curses a Chacham, even after his death, menadim otho beth din, he is to be excommunicated. Wahem matirim otho k'sheyachzor b'teshuvah, and this will be undone. This will be this excommunication will be nullified k'sheyachzor b'teshuvah, when the person in question understands that he was mistaken and expresses remorse. Aval im haya hachacham hai, but if the Chacham in question is still alive, en matirim lo ad sheyiratzeh zeh shenidohu b'shvilo, then the Beit Din does not reverse their decision regarding excommunication until he himself goes to the Chacham and begs his forgiveness, etc. And of course, this also implies that he does teshuvah. He would not, when one assumes he would not be going to the Chacham and seek seek forgiveness if he has not done teshuvah. So we see here another aspect of a normative, healthy Jewish society, where it is not the case that anything goes, that anybody can say and do as they please, precisely because, again, the Torah has a special place and role in Jewish society, and those who in any way impinge upon that role, that status, that place of pride that the Torah has in the Jewish world. Anyone who does anything to lessen and undo that reality in the Jewish world is acting against the eternal and fundamental nature of Jewish society, and is doing a great harm to the Jewish society. And therefore, excommunication, which is a very serious matter, where no one can speak to you and no one can sit next to you and eat with you, do business with you. You're not allowed to enter the Beit Knesset, etc., etc. This is a very serious matter indeed, and it's reserved for very unique and outstanding, exceptional circumstances. But this is such a circumstance because it is in essence an attack on the Jewish people in general, not just on the individual in question. Rambam continues and says, I'm sorry, Tethwell, Halakha Tethwell. The Hacham himself, he is allowed to excommunicate a person who behaved in an outrageous manner towards him, and hifkirbo means made light of, insulted, publicly dishonored, etc. And he does not have to produce witnesses, nor does he have to first warn this person, if you continue doing this, you will be excommunicated. I will excommunicate you. No, he doesn't need to do that. And he is, again, will not be released from this state of affairs of excommunication, which was a very powerful weapon against such people. This will not be undone until he again goes to the Chacham and asks for forgiveness and indicates that he has mended his ways. And if the Chacham in question died before this happened, before he was Chozeh B'Teshuvah, Ba'im Shalosha Umatirim Lo. Another Beit Din of 3 can be matir, the excommunication. They can undo it. If a Chacham feels that in this case he wishes to forego and this possibility of excommunication, and he wishes to ignore what was done, he is permitted to do so. It should be noted that this was a very palpable outcome of what's called the emancipation in Europe. As long as Jews were forced to live in a ghetto, and they were required legally, their status legally was that of a member of a certain community, in this case a Jewish community. The Jewish communities, certainly in ancient times and medieval times, and in fact largely up to let's say 250, 300 years ago, something like that, these Jewish communities had tremendous autonomy. They had they had Batei Din, which dealt with almost all legal matters. In some periods, in some times, the Batei Din could also deal with capital crimes such as murder. And they were permitted to do this by the king or the government of the day. When this social structure began to unravel, all of a sudden there were Jews who found that they could get away almost with murder. They could get away with many things they could not get away with before. So this type of reality, where the Beth Din has tremendous power and authority, began to fell into decline. And this on the one hand, so many people would say that emancipation was a wonderful thing, and in some ways it was. In other ways, it had a deleterious effect on Jewish society, because it allowed people to the internal structure of Jewish society and the various institutions such as the Beth Din began to fell into decline, and their authority was whittled away. This began first in France under Napoleon, and then it spread in many other countries. So that there was definitely a not so positive side to these historical developments. Although, on the other hand, one would usually think that such a emancipation and removal of various forms of discrimination was a good thing for the Jews. But in fact, it was not always a purely positive development. Rambam continues and says in Halakha Tet Zayin or Yud Gimel, Harav shenida lichvado, a Chacham who excommunicated someone because that person disparaged, dishonored, etc. And this is known, and therefore he felt it was necessary to do so. Hayavim kol talmido linhog nidui b'menudeh. All his talmidim, first of all, are required to treat this person as a menudeh, as someone who is excommunicated. Aval talmid shenida lichvod asmo, even a talmid chachamim might do the same thing, might excommunicate someone. And harav hayav linhog bo nidui aval kol ha'am hayavim linhog bo nidui. The Rav of that Talmud, in other words, when we say Talmud here, we're not talking about, some yeshiva bocha, 18-year-old yeshiva bocha who began studying Bava Batra yesterday. We're talking about a serious Chacham, but he is the Talmud of a more serious Chacham. He might be, for argument's sake, he might be 45, but his Rav might be, whatever, 80, whatever the case may be. He's a greater Chacham. His nidui does not necessarily obligate his Rav to act in the same manner, although in many cases the Rav would want to do so because he knows that his Talmid, who is a Chacham of stature in his own right, did not do so lightly or without good reason. But it goes without saying that the general populace, hayavim linhog bo nidui. V'chein menudeh lanosi, if the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, the head of the Beth Din of Am Yisrael, someone was excommunicated by him, menudeh lechol Yisrael, he is in a state of excommunication for all Jews everywhere. Menudeh lechol Yisrael eno menudeh lanasi. But the other way around doesn't necessarily work. If someone was put in nidui by other people, the Nasi does not necessarily have to behave in that fashion towards this person. Although again, very often he would do so for obvious reasons, but it might be the case for various reasons that he would not be. So what would the difference be? The difference might be that he would be willing to meet with him, maybe to discuss the problem. But even meeting with a person who's menudeh is impossible. You cannot sit within the same arba amot of this person. You cannot meet with him at all. Whereas the nasi might choose to meet with him, perhaps to solve the underlying problem. Menudeh le'iro, menudeh le'ira hereth. Menudeh le'ira hereth, no menudeh le'iro. If a person was placed in nidui by the people of his own town, he cannot simply pick up and say, okay, fine, you people decided to excommunicate me. I'll move down the road or down the river and I will set up shop and move my household to another town. That won't help him. He will be considered benidui by other Jews in another town as well. But if the Jews of another town, another community, placed him in nidui, excommunicated him, that does not necessarily obligate the people of his own town to do the same. They may choose to do so, they may think it's absolutely correct and justified, but it doesn't necessarily follow. When is this the case? Rambam says, this all refers to the case of a Jew who was excommunicated because of his attitude towards and behavior towards Talmidei Hachamim, because he makes light of them and he therefore cheapens and makes light of the Torah in the eyes of the public. All these halachot that we discussed in this perek, says Rambam, this all applies to such a case. Aval mishaniduhu al shar devarim shehayavim alehem nidui. Afilu nidahu qatan shebiyisrael hayav hanasi v'chol Yisrael inhog bo nidui. Ad sheyachzor b'teshuva midavar sheniduhu b'shvilo v'yatiru lo. When it comes to the other types of behavior and misbehavior, unacceptable, completely unacceptable behavior, that also justify this very extreme step of excommunication for other reasons other than bizui Talmidei Chachamim, then once a person is in that situation, all Jews are required to treat him as menudeh until he does teshuvah and is known and made known to all that he has done teshuvah, v'yatiru lo, and then this excommunication will be nullified. And now, because there are many other situations, the Rambam now discusses in the next halakha, which we will look at next time, B'ezrat Hashem. Rambam lists here, there are 24 categories or types of behavior or act that justify nidui. And that, B'ezrat Hashem, we shall look at next time. We'll stop here for today. Hayu beruchim, hizku v'yames lebavchem kol hameyahalim l'Adonai. Shalom u'nisachon.